How are you? Welcome to the present edition of Critical Moves of Telesur, where we place on the table topics that are everybody's concern. Let's begin. The African Union sets its eye on problems of their member states, but also of things that have to do in their surroundings, be this by other affairs. There has been a recent summit of this organization. What is the main problem of this region now? How does this insert in the geopolitics of the world? Let's not forget they're very rich in resources, but they're poor. Let's begin. Let's begin with declaration of some of the people that went to this recently finished. We should find several solutions to address the problems that we have, both political, legal, military. We hope that based on solutions for African people, we can set aside from the interference of other countries. The case of Palestine illustrates well how things can go wrong. The conflict, this agreement of the century for Palestine is obviously not good for one of the parties, for Palestine. This is another thing why we need to work our own problems on our own. With regards to the inspired U.S. plans for the Palestinian, while I heard it, I recalled the history that we have lived in South Africa. The African world and the Arab world rejects this project, as well as other countries. The United States did not find another associate that would support this. It has no way out for the sovereignty of Palestine. It does not give them control over their country. No control on their frontiers, sovereignty, border control. According to this plan, the frontiers would be in Israeli control. We are witnessing in Libya a very dangerous confrontation and the multiplication of foreign interference. It is the obligation of the Arab League to find a solution. The past 10 years were the hottest ones we've registered. Now, this is what we see with climate change. Africa is the least responsible for this change. However, it is among those the countries that will be affected the most. Our countries need to find solutions to confront. How about if we do a map of this regional organism? African Union integration mechanism. It's a mechanism which it's made up of 55 countries. The African Union began in 1951 in Addis Ababa, where the secretariat is located. However, it was until 2001 that it began to work in Durban, in South Africa. It tries to promote solidarity among their members, coordinate and safeguard the cooperation of everybody. The future organisms they also have a common market, a customs union, a central bank, to have a common currency. They want to have a common market by 2023. This common market will have made their decisions in their assembly every 6 months. The leaders of the government are always gathered there. The main problems are the financial dependency as well as the rivalries and division among the governments. What were the aspects that have to do with this? What were the conclusions?
Tras concluir la 33ª cumbre de la Unión Africana con el lema Silenciar las armas y crear
After the last meeting, the members left clear that the priority for this integration mechanism will be to work in this resolution of regional problems, especially in Libya. Part of their conclusions, the leaders of these governments agreed to confront terrorism, to demand the cease intervention in Libya, to condemn the agreement of the century. They say that this does not help the solution between Israel and Palestine. To show solidarity with China due to the coronavirus attack, to improve the infrastructure in the country, and to promote women in the region, to show solidarity with the Sahrawi people, and to find a solution with Somalia, Chad, Congo, and to dialogue about the free trade agreement that was agreed in 2019 to have a common market that may begin this year. Finally, to increase the African Union intervention in United Nations to gain a seat at the Security Council that would allow them to have one more seat and to have two permanent ones with a right to veto. Let's start with digital websites. This is the locust in Africa. It goes to Uganda. Uganda has taken measures while United Nations say that they cannot. They need to have impact in this region. Just after that, there was an attack. There was a display. There will be more help for the locust invasion. They have destroyed complete harvest crops that haven't seen this in 70 years. Likewise in Somalia and Ethiopia that have not suffered of this in 25 years. The insects have taken advantage of the humid conditions that are caused by the unusual rain. This is what the Mark Lowcock said. He's the coordinator for humanitarian affairs of the United Nations. He says that a region where 12 million people are confronting insecurity in the food supply cannot oversee this problem. Remember that we already saw this locust invasion, a program in Critical Move. Another one we saw was the Vanguard. It says, inequality, the main obstacle to combat Ebola. A great epidemic virus. The first cases were detected in 2013 in Guinea, the first country that officially declared the outbreak of Ebola. Just soon after, it was declared as a world interest problem, and they tried to interrupt the infection. There were also several scientists that went to Africa to find and discover the origin of this virus. However, many governments said that the World Health Organization had acted too late and that everything went down the hill because there was not enough time and money put into it. The fact that the sanitary situation of the country was already bad allowed for the expansion of this virus to grow very fast. This sickness is still not, they did not overcome. In the United States, there were 4 infected, only 1 died. The difference of the investment of money that is done in West as well as in Africa just reflects the great inequality in the world. One of the main reasons is the exploitation and colonization that the European countries did on the African countries during the 19th and 20th century. We also speak of a new spread in Congo in 2018. The government of this country declared officially a new outbreak. This was in Kivu North. This was the 10th outbreak in the country. Up until now, the authorities have reacted on time, and they have been able to confront this attack. The World Health Organization has sent help for months, so the epidemic will be controlled. This is something else that happens to the African nations.
¿Qué le traigo a visa de recomendación hoy? Un artículo que se titula Las operaciones antiterroristas ocultas de Estados Unidos en África. Ha sido escrito por Matthew.
This has been written by Matthew Petty. It's called the anti-terrorist United States in Africa. Nobody knows how much the United States spends in its secret operation in Africa. This is said by the Inspector General. They have operated in Africa to degrade However, the people have hardly seen the strategies of this organism. What they've seen is that, however, it's not useful because there has been no stop.
Ha ido en aumento durante el último mes. 3 estadounidenses murieron en un ataque en una base aérea de Kenia el 5 de enero.
There have been attacks on land.
El general Stephen Townsend que testificara el 20 de enero. En total,
in total, 6,000 military people are displayed in Africa, and this represents a deal for the U.S. taxpayer and a low-cost insurance for the people in the United States. The U.S. military budgets are done on how much the U.S. forces cost. This has to do with the translation. The original translation is not that good. This was explained by Benjamin Friedman. Then the report did not reveal the operations, if the operations have been able to stop the spread of terrorism. They say that there has been a diminution in 71% between 2018 and 2019. However, the Inspector General has found that the national Somali government did not show, I quote, the capacity to maintain the land without international support, close quote. From Africa, let's continue. From Oscar Esper. Tell us a little bit more details. Let's continue. The president of South Africa, Ramaphosa, takes over the presidency of the African Union 2020 and proposes to mobilize the 55 member states to further strengthen all of their links and create the sustainable development and to make the voice of Africa be heard. This recent summit has been about trying to create the conditions to the development of Africa. This has been already spoken in 2013. The conflicts have increased. However, the president says that there are almost no conflicts, and there is also a major conscience about the need to find innovative solutions and not strictly military, based on solidarity, to try to talk about the Sahel conflict, or Sudan, or Libya, or climate change. Going back to the liberation of Nelson Mandela, Ramaphosa had said that the story shows us that we are able to overcome the most intricate problems if we work together. The first challenge of the African Union is to bring together all of our discussions and try to find the construction of the peace in this northern country of Africa, where the rival parties have remained so. On the other hand, in South Sudan, there has to be a union government before 22nd of February, and there is still no agreement on the numbers and the frontiers of the regional entities. They have tried to implement this mechanism of silencing the weapons. This would be a condition, and to evolve the solidarity with which Africa tries to build a new discourse based on Let's go back to Caracas.
Muchísimas gracias, Oscar. Marcamos entonces la primera pausa en nuestra jugada crítica.
Let's go to our first pause. If you see what our question today is the following: terrorism and violence, climate change, and extreme poorness are things that still worry the African countries. Of who does this depend on? And they will still advance. Participate with us. Give us your criteria. We'll be right back.
China ayudará a la Unión Africana en la construcción de
Who's going to help the African Union for centers of control of diseases of Africa and the construction of infrastructure?
Ahí veíamos entonces el criterio de China respecto a esta región.
There we have the request of China for this region that today we center our focus on. Almost 20 countries of Africa have a repercussion of the wars that are going on. The problems of Sudan and other countries are still ongoing. And of course, there's the other worse, like Sahel and Libya.
Tras la intervención de la OTAN en 2011 que derrocó el gobierno de Muammar Gaddafi, asesinado ese mismo año,
Libya is now in hands of several armed groups that dispute the control of the country. Ever since 2014, the African nation is controlled by Khalifa Haftar, and the last year had an offensive to take over Tripoli, that is the governmental capital. On the other hand, you have the government of unity that is led by Al-Fayez, and this crisis has caused thousands of dead and millions of displaced. On the other hand, Somalia, there is a conflict since 1991. This is one of the countries that has the widest long-spread crisis. Al-Shabaab, which is an armed group, threatened to fracture even more the unity. The violence that is perpetrated by these terrorist groups has left more than 2 million Somali people displaced and keeps on killing citizens. The Sahara area, there is live under the threat of the Islamic State. This conflict began in 2013 in South Sudan, rapidly turned into an armed conflict, and has left all of the Sudanese in a war that has provoked an undetermined number of civil casualties. Up until now, all the attempts for a peace process has not prospered at all. Seeing this, the United Nations has found an agreement of peace that may work. The consequences of these conflicts, especially for women and children, are very, very pitiful. For years, lives have been destroyed, and some rights are not well observed. There is sexual violence. There is violence in general against children and girls in Africa. Now let's go to a first instant Today I'm bad at my Spanish. Okay, let's begin with the first part of our guests in Critical Moves. From Cuba, we have Mr. Silverio Gonzalez. He's an investigator in the International Investigation Group. He is the leader of the Africa Group, and Sergio Galeana, he's an expert in international relations, and we want to thank you both to our program. I would like to begin with Joslan. Let's see that if we've seen through the report to offer an illustration on the main points that are plaguing Africa now. What else do we have to talk about? What is the problem of Africa now in the context of this African Union that was just held? Well, I would like to greet everybody over there, and there are many challenges that Africa is confronted with. In the reports you presented, we've seen some of the main challenges that we're confronting. Many regions within the African group. Of course, this is not a problem that is generalized in all of the African continent, but it's important to compare them if we do the same thing here. So let's not forget that here there is a reduction of the armed conflicts in our region. We have mentioned in the program the topic of terrorism that keeps on being one of the main security problems that is confronted by the African continent. But it's more focused in the Sahel, in the north of Mali, the north of Niger, the border with Burkina Faso and Mali, to the north of Nigeria, and Somalia, in the part of the African Horn.
Que el Grupo Al-Shabaab pueda estar haciendo en el caso de Kenia.
The factors of development of these terrorist groups are multiple, and they have to do with the economic situation of these regions. Moreover, of the outskirts of the cities. We can also see that these terrorist groups have a different evolution, each one. That's why we sometimes perceive that there is an increase of terrorist groups. It's because they've been fractioning, and there has been cells of the Islamic State. And this is part of a strategy of this group that is based on the military acts of these groups to confront them. So here there are different focuses that could be used. Some authors speak of the increase in the actions in the zone of the Sahel, while in others there has been a diminution. I repeat, terrorism is not a generalized phenomenon in the African continent. They have been focalized in the countries that we spoke about, Mali, Niger. In the past years, we have also seen a level of these terrorist groups that goes beyond their area of influence. This is why these summits of the African Union, the topic of security is fundamental. In this sense, the fight against terrorism is fundamental. There are other conflicts that have nothing to do with this. Well, if you allow me, let's go to our next guest, and then we will go back to the conflicts. Sergio, hello. I would like to greet you to Critical Moves. Joslan spoke about a very important problem that affects Africa, which is terrorism that goes beyond borders. Joslan said that this is not generalized in the whole continent, but there is outbursts in certain areas. So the question is, why are these terrorists going beyond borders? Weren't they problems that were just domestic, or does it go beyond? So just like we see the transportation of transborder of these epidemics like locust. So tell me, does it have to do with African affairs, or can it have external influence? Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be with you. I think that in both cases, we see a foreign influence. We see how there are groups are trying to vinculate themselves with the political realm. And for example, in the Gulf, we have the case of Libya, where there is a in 2010, there had been a mediation and this was in the Gaddafi group. In this sense, the case of Libya, there is and this is what we see. There is a destruction of the country, but this country is provoked from outside. This is a country that is practically balkanized. There are mechanisms of trying to recruit people beyond the Horn of Africa, even Libya, that are trying to recruit people to commit their crimes. And this has to do with the fragility of the country to secure their borders and the fragility of the regimes. And of course, these take advantage. And they push other interests. In Libya, the case is very emblematic, because they have sought for mediation, but it was rejected. However, they have to report the political mechanisms to see if the interior tensions can be taken advantage of by these groups to destabilize the continent. If the continent reappears, they may ramify to an instability wave in the whole region. That's why the political intervention at the maximum level is the correct way to confront these conflicts that in no way can be left
De
behind.
acuerdo, Sergio, y no olvidemos
Thank you,
tampoco la
Sergio. Let's
influencia
not
que tenía la
forget the
Libia de Muammar
influence
Gaddafi justamente
of
en estos
Muammar
países de la
Gaddafi
Unión
in this.
Africana. Influencia para bien, quiero decir. Ya para concluir, Joslan, mencionabas
So,
cuando te
Joslan,
interrumpía que había otros
you
puntos
mentioned that
que
there were
merecían
other
ser
points that you were speaking
atendidos
about
cuando del África
when
contemporánea
Africa,
hablamos.
we're speaking about
Con el
Africa.
poder de síntesis que sé que te caracteriza,
With
aunque no
your
lo
power
pusiste en
of
demostración al
synthesis,
principio de nuestra jugada crítica, como buen cubano habla mucho, pero ahora sí va a tener poder de síntesis. ¿Cuáles son esos
what
aspectos
are
que no
those
podemos dejar de
aspects
mencionar?
that we cannot leave without mentioning?
También está, uno de los principales retos es
Well, one
impulsar
of
el
the
proceso de
main
integración
challenges is to
continental.
boost
Es una-
an
es decir, la
integration of
creación
the
del área de comercio
continent,
continental, que ha sido también otro de los puntos discutidos
which is
en
one
las
of the
últimas cumbres de la-
another of
de
the
la
points
Unión
that were
Africana.
discussed
Los
in
líderes
the
africanos están
in the
abocados a
summits of the
a
African
este
Union.
proceso, y es un elemento muy importante.
And this is a very
porque la
important
creación de esta
element.
zona de libre comercio
This
continental
area
se
of
plantea que
free
va a
commerce
favorecer el intercambio
will
comercial entre
will
los diferentes
favor
países africanos,
the
dinamizar
commerce
las
between many
economías
countries within
africanas, y por tanto creo que
within
esto
the
es un factor
continent.
muy
And this
importante,
is a
y
very
es- y
important
se ha
factor.
se ha discutido
This has
de
been
manera muy fuerte en
discussed
la cumbre
now
de
in
la
the
Unión Africana.
in the African
Por
Union
supuesto, también
Summit.
habría que hablar de
We should
la
also
implementación
speak
del
of the
proceso de reformas de la Unión
implementation
Africana, muy interesante, el tema de las cumbres,
of
el tema
some
de el
of
Consejo
some
de Paz y
alterations
Seguridad
because
de la Unión Africana relacionado con la cuestión de los conflictos, la relación que puede
the
existir
relations
entre
that could
los
exist
mecanismos de
between
integración
the
subregionales
the
y la Unión
sub-regional
Africana. Esto
mechanisms
también
and the
es
African
interesante
Union.
porque
This
en
is
la medida
also
de
a
que
very
esto se
interesting
pueda,
topic because
fortalecer, es decir,
if
la
we can
dirección de funciones
strengthen
entre la Unión Africana y los mecanismos de
the
integración
African Union and
subregionales,
the
todos estos
sub-regional
elementos pueden
mechanisms,
favorecer
all of this
precisamente a
can
la
favor
eliminación de estos conflictos,
the
crisis
the
políticas
release
o los
of these
problemas
conflicts
electorales,
and these
y la Unión
tensions.
Africana ha tenido un rol muy importante en
And the
ese sentido.
African role has had a very
Excelente,
important
Yolanda,
role in
justamente
this
por la importancia
sense.
de esos aspectos que estás mencionando y ya ves cómo puede
And
ser
because of the importance of these members
vamos a
of
someter
your
un
mentioning,
análisis de
let's
corta
take this
pausa
to an
con nuestro próximo
analysis
invitado. A ti y a
with
Sergio,
with our
muchísimas
next
gracias por haber
guest. Thank you,
comparecido hoy
Sergio,
en
and
la Jugada
you
Crítica de Sur.
for
Hasta la
accompanying
próxima.
us in Jugada
Antes de la
Crítica.
pausa, también
Before our
invito, si se
pause,
acaba de
I
conectar
think we
con
should
nosotros, que
also
participe en la jugada
mention
estratégica
that
que
some
ilustra
people have
en esta
connected with
pantalla
us to
terrorismo,
participate
violencia étnica,
in the
cambio
following
climático,
questions.
pobreza extrema,
Terrorism,
asuntos que
violence,
siguen preocupando a
climate
los
change,
países
and
miembros
extreme
de la Unión
poverty are
Africana.
topics
¿De
that
qué
still
fin
concern the
depende que
members of the African
y avance
Union.
por vías de
Who does it
desarrollo?
depend to
Opino
find
que a
a
nuestro
goodbye
tiempo
to
le daré
arms
su
and
criterio sobre este
get
tema
out of all of these
particular.
problems?
Mientras mando a la
Please
pausa
participate
y
with
también
us.
le voy a... Como cuna de civilizaciones, África se ha convertido en el
As the
principal
cradle of
reservorio de
civilization,
riqueza
Africa
que
has been the
grandes
biggest
potencias,
reserve
imperios han,
of resources
extraído
that
de
many
nuestro
empires
continente. ¿Cómo se
have
comportan ellos?
taken out
Las
of this
jugadas
country.
geopolíticas
What is the
en la actualidad?
geopolitical
Vamos a
play
escuchar
that
esto.
we see nowadays?
En la última década,
In the
África
last
ha
decade,
experimentado una
Africa has
importante
gone through
apertura
an
extranjera en
important
materia de relaciones
investment
bilaterales, comercio
of
internacional
foreign
e inversión
capitals.
extranjera. La discreta baja
The
hegemónica de
discrete
Estados
loss
Unidos en el
of
mercado
hegemony
mundial
in
ha
the world
permitido que
market has
China
allowed
ponga en
China
marcha nuevas
to put
opciones a
in
los países
track
africanos.
some
El gigante
business with
asiático ha
African
desarrollado un
countries.
agresivo proyecto de
Africa
alta
has been
inversión y
aggressive
comercio que lo ha
in
visto
commerce
establecerse firmemente
that
en varios
has made them
países,
become stern
particularmente
in several
subsaharianos, con
countries,
grandes proyectos
like
de
the
infraestructura,
sub-Saharan,
cooperación
in
económica y militar.
cooperation, both
Rusia también ha
economic and
retomado los
military.
nexos diplomáticos y
Russia
económicos
has
para
also
instalar, como lo ha hecho
has
la
also
Unión
imposed
Europea en su
their
conjunto, más
money and their
Reino Unido,
investments.
vías de
UK
colaboración
also.
muestran una
There are
oferta mucho más
cooperation
multipolar de
links
lo
that
habitual.
show
Muchos
how there is
estados
more
africanos
cooperation.
aprovechan
Many
esta oportunidad a
African
través de
countries
procesos de
take
negociación
advantage
bilateral que
of
culminan en
bilateral
acuerdos diversos con múltiples países al mismo
bilateral
tiempo.
commercialization.
A pesar de que África es la segunda
Regardless of the
región
fact
mayor
that Africa is the
económico en los
second
últimos
largest
10
region
años,
of
con
growth in the past years with 4.6% of the GDP, only 0.000% concentrates the richness of the region, according to the World Bank.
Segundo momento del análisis en nuestra jugada crítica. Nos
A second
acompaña
moment
Luis
of our
Fernando
analysis, here we
Paz.
have Luis Reinaldo Paz.
Una vez más.
Muchísimas gracias por la
Luis?
Thank you. He's an expert in conflicts. And we're going to speak about this in Africa. And speaking of Africa, we were also analyzing the motto that pushed this last summit. It's to silence the weapons and create concessions for the African development. But to silence weapons is not new for the African Union. In fact, this proposal comes from 2013, when the proposal was done, and at that point there were 17 armed conflicts in the region, and they said it was important to stop the weapons because this was going against the institution of the government. This proposal is going to be retaken in 2020, and South Africa does it, going to try to push this initiative. So, not to see it like this. 7 years later, out of this first issue of the no issue of the weapons, well, the answer is because selling weapons is such a great business. The main seller is the United States. He represents 35% of the world supply of weapons, and in Africa it's almost 58%. So it's over half of the weapons are from the U.S. And the second providers are France and Germany. So the big countries are not interested in putting this outroar, this outcry. So we're speaking of two powers, United States, the other one would be France and Germany, that are now the heads of the European Union, and that have practically pushed the expenditure of weapons in Africa. France that also has some history there. They had a colony in the continent. And France has pushed the weapon sale. They have tried to participate in Africa and Mali, especially. But they have clashed with this the presence of European countries is like taking back some power. And the last years, the criticism that the African countries have done to this participation of the European Union in the peace missions in the United States has only generated more conflicts. And this has happened in the Sahel. And the case of Libya, that is a study case. Before, let's go to make a precision. Of course, the concept of jihad implies the analysis of the Quran. It means effort, and what they want to do is be a better Muslim. There's two types of jihad: the great jihad that tries to look to secure borders, and we have to understand the Quran was written in the 11th century. So this, with the arrival of Mahoma and the push of the Islamism. So I think we have to understand it in the correct context. And now this, that's just the small jihad that the believer moves inside. This is something in your heart. So I think that we should speak about these groups as extremist. And yes, there is a tendency in some countries, especially in the European ones, because some people think that all of the terrorists are from Somalia. And I think it's important to see what the president of the commission has said. He said he was looking for the need to fight against everything that has to do with the forces, with the. And yes, there are some. And he speaks of the lack of solidarity with some African countries when it's time to see what happens in each country. And what we need to do is stop this fight. And he spoke about something specific that was the national catastrophes and Mozambique. And there was no support from the other countries. So the question is, how much do these countries trust one another? And all of these members have a hard vote. And yes, it has been a bloc that shows solidarity, even in the cases of Palestine, when there's and of course the independence of Sahrawi. But it's also important to highlight. And when we see it in international terms, we see the differences between each state. Like, for example, Libya, where Egypt is supporting the president. However, in the African Union, they say we're going to find a reconciliation method where the African Union has lots of experience to gain the peace in Libya. And they have also clashed with the foreign interference, because it's easy to say one thing and then we have to see the connotations of what's going on later, because in 1885 there was a distribution of the continent, and this generated a lot of buzz. And this was recognized by the General Secretary of the United Nations, when he says that he recognizes the frustration of the African continent, because in the case of Libya, it was not taken into account for the process of taking of decisions. Now, the arrival of the President of Africa also brings forward a set of priorities. For example, it has to do with women's rights, fight against conflict. So we must see this from a wide spectrum. We have to see that there was Africa did have a sharp crisis, and there were cuts of electricity. The outcome of Africa doesn't seem to be the best. It's complicated. Just as complicated it is to empower the African woman to go beyond cultural beliefs. Well, there is a lot of patriarchy in the African continent. For example, if we see the 54 presidents in a picture, you see that there's almost none are women. And it's hard to empower women when in fact the women are not part of the directive offices. And it's important to make investments to empower women. And this is a factor that could limit the development of the countries, because in the long run this goes after of the president. There's no secret that the women, children, and elderly people are the biggest victims in the armed forces. This has been said by ACNUR, which is the entity that works with refugees in the United Nations, have also spoke about this. 90% of the African Union money comes from the European Union, and 10% comes from donations of certain countries. And let's not forget, in 2018, he donated $1 million to set the example. But because he says that many governments do not, and when they don't have any financing, the African Union cannot.
Digamos, un ejército regional, ¿no?
And in the case of Sahel, this would be one option. However, with other regions, what is so important is to have the resources, the money to do this. So there are some difficulties to see, but it's important to know that. And yes, it was interesting, but they need more depth to it. So yes, it's just a rhetoric speech. They always react after that everybody does. And the plan that is proposed by Donald Trump and as we heard in some of the declarations, it was said why such an important part of this conflict, which is Palestine, the victim, and all of the reasons and all of the consequences that this has. In fact, the European Union has established the work union, and in the case of the Arab League, we don't see that they are part of it. They don't have a clear work agenda, and there are also internal conflicts like the one with Qatar and Saudi Arabia, Syria, and that is now so dispersed. And the problem the Arab League has, each member has interfered in other state problems, and this stops a little bit their scope of action. And this has contributed to give arms to more radical groups. So to silence the arms in Africa. And I think it's important to see where these weapons come from. So whatever they do, I think would be an option would be to have another different CCC that responds different. Many have died in this mare mortum. And the element that can be overseen is registered. However, there is a great number of money that comes in through the border, and if United Nations has a compromise. But when we speak of the international community, I want to stop just 1 minute, because the producer is calling me all over. This is a very vague term. How can we put the bell on the cat? Well, it's hard when the United States is a great power. And now it's harder when other nations Apparently there are 26 embargoes worldwide right now, but we have to find a mechanism on a multilateral level, especially with the African Union, to see what type of weapons are conformed. and also to see how we can stop it. And I think it's important more to combat it. We have to fight its origins. And there's the European intelligence that are interested in cane. And let's see who benefits from all this. I think that the benefits present themselves in places where there are natural resources. And why there? Because there's where the interests are. And they want to take over. This is the case of Mali, that many people who has had the opportunity to go to Mali, we've seen how people complain about why they can have a mission piece, but not everything is protected. Here we have the idea that it's better for them to take over the lands while the countries are busy fighting the wars. Of course, there's a proposal with the South African president, but I don't think this will go through if there is not a consensus between the African Union and some important countries that would try to go through with this. Luis Reinaldo, thank you very much for this analysis. Let's go to our conclusions. So the terrorism is still around the African territory, and along with it, the effects of climate change is making it even worse. So it's they also have an alarming toll of poverty. This comes with the efforts of China and Russia to invest in situ. However, some other empires don't want to let them do all of this. This leads us always to ask ourselves the same question. Who is pushing the wars in Africa? It's up to you to see the answer. This is all for today. Thank you very much.